Now gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage Rahul Parma, who's come to join us from Google. Rahul will be talking to us about machine learning, giving us some great examples of kind of Google's platform and how they're using that to support their clients and customers in delivering sort of digitally led growth strategies and enhanced profitability. So I'll leave you in Rahul's more than capable hands.
Hello. This is a really fancy stage. I didn't realize it was going to be this high-end when I said, yes, I'll come to Leeds and do this conversation. So I'm really excited that I did it because the stock photos are going to be awesome. So really quickly, I will, as Pete mentioned, I'm on the Google Cloud team, so working on our machine learning and big data solutions. I focus largely on MarTech and Adtech, so whether that's global agencies like your friends here at iPro, or DSPs, DMPs, RTBs, all the Ps effectively sit with me as well in the UK. So why don't I start? We've been talking about machine learning. I thought it'd be fun to show you some of our ML tech first. Have all of you used Google Images before, or Google Image Search? I would imagine that's not a crazy ask, right? Most of you have searched for images? OK, perfect. Can we go to the laptop, please? That was quicker than I thought. OK, so what you're seeing here is what I would call like an image nebula. Let's go with that. It's about 100,000 images that we've run through the Vision API and tagged. So if you look at it a little closer, you can see that the major tag cloud is kind of related, right? So if you see, maybe we go a little bit closer here. Oh, too close. Crowd and transport seem to be there together in the middle. That's because most images of transportation generally have a crowd. Think of the London Tube, which is where I live, and it's awful. Things like diagram and web page come together. Flower and plant also cluster together. So you kind of get an idea of what I mean. But if we dig into one, and I'm from Google, so the company policy is always start with a cat. You can see here that we have a cat. Now, our hold on, I'm a little zoomed in here. There we go. That's a bit better. So if you see here on the right side, you're seeing what the API actually picks up from the image, right? So obviously, number one is it's a cat. Number two is it's probably a pet. Number three is it's a mammal, da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, I would say I'm a bit of a cat savant, but I would not have guessed that's a British Shorthair just because I'm not that savant-esque when it comes to picking out cats. So you can see there that with an animal like that, we can pull out some basic semantic data of what's going on in the image, which is cool, but probably not that relevant unless any of you are from Wiscus. OK, good. Let's move to this one here. This is a family or a social group of some kind. So here, you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 or 8 people. The API is saying it's a social group. They're wearing clothing, super positive for my rider. They're people, they're in costume, da-da-da-da. What can be more interesting, though, and this is where it gets a bit more interesting in the marketing space, is if we turn on landmarks, you'll see that the API has actually picked up all of the faces in the image already. And you'll actually see, for person 1, for example, who's this gentleman in the glasses, it'll say roll -5, pan to tilt -5. So again, it's showing us kind of where they're looking, what their emotion is. Joy on them doesn't seem that high, but person number 2 here, this person on the right, the female, is extremely happy. So you can see that joy on her is quite high. I think person number 4 is in pretty bad shape, or now person number 7. Yeah, person 7 is this girl here in the front, in the right. She's not having a great time. But again, you can kind of quickly see how this might look for someone in the marketing space, right? If you had a lot of creatives, for example, with a lot of people's faces on them, and you wanted to marry that up with performance data and get an idea of what kind of emotions on people's faces in creatives drive the best CTR, CPA, whatever it may be, this API kind of sits in the middle, right? It takes that unstructured data, so a bunch of people's faces, or the major background color of a creative, or whatever logo might be in there, makes it structured, and then pushes it back out. And then you marry it up with performance data. And we actually ran a case study on this with you guys, which is quite good. I don't know if you've released it out to all these people yet, but you should. So yeah, that's kind of where we see Vision API coming into play. The last piece I would show you is, and it's probably not that exciting given it's our logo, but we recognize that as Android. But I think we also do a few others. So right out of the gate, you throw an image at it to tell you the logo in it. So again, depending on what you're looking, so we have publishers that use this kind of thing, for example, to scan the content of pages, figure out what ads they want to put on those pages based on what's being said. You can do something similar with natural language processing, speech, video, all that kind of stuff. So I think one of the cooler use cases I've seen is, one of the major channels in the UK that produces a lot of documentaries is building their new video library around stuff like this. So if I wanted to pull stock footage of everything we've shot that has a beach in it, I can do that and then pick from those shots if I want to use any of those in the new stuff I'm creating, as opposed to having to go get new shots. So it's a kind of a cool use case in that sense. Can we go back to the slides, please? Okay, so that being said, and there's one more demo I'll show you later on that I think would be fun to get into, but let's get moving. So I think I'm going to focus on, or I know I'm going to focus on, let's say, 3 things: channel first to customer first, building existing relationships, and then intelligence at every step. In the first instance, with channel first to customer first, we're really seeing much more now that marketing isn't about where you buy media, it's which eyeballs you actually want to buy. The where is kind of the second step of the conversation. So how can you move from buying paid search, let's say, to I want to buy those guys because they came, or guys like the ones that I have because they came from paid search, kind of more into that space. Building relationships with existing customers, so building customer data platforms to understand the people that I sell to now and what I could offer them to sell more to, so more cross-sell, upsell. And then the last piece is intelligence at every step. So all of the data I generate, once I've joined it up, how can I activate it via marketing tools, whether that be DoubleClick or another RTB DSP solution or whatever else it might be? How can I take that customer data, send it back in, and buy smarter ads with it, effectively? So channel first to customer first. So today it's hard to deliver a pretty compelling experience if you don't have a full view of your relationship with customers, right? Like you don't want to be sending offers to customers that have just bought the offer that you're sending. You're kind of trying to manage. That's a very basic example, but you understand where I'm going with it. So I think one of the major issues we're seeing with advertisers in any industry, basically, is that this is what their marketing data potentially looks like, right? And for every single one of these bubbles, it's not that just Joe or just Jill owns it. It's 7 different people with 7 different silos and 7 different KPIs trying to that don't really want to talk to each other. But bringing this stuff together is probably the most powerful thing you can do. And actually, bringing this stuff together and then giving it to these guys is even better, right? That's the kind of data set or kind of intelligence you want to provide back to the agency. So to better understand and serve them, you definitely need to connect this stuff up. Now, there is a huge amount of business value in doing it. When we spoke to Harvard, they told us pretty much, their analysis shows this drives massive shareholder returns. That's not really that surprising to have Harvard University tell you that if you know your customers, you'll make more money, but whatever, it's in the business. So the incentive is there for most companies to do this kind of thing. It's really kind of more politics and technology that can get in the way. But I did want to flag at least one case where we've seen this and seen it very successfully. Now, this says leading car manufacturer because when I first put this deck together, this wasn't actually public. It's actually Mercedes-Benz. So if you're in the market for Mercedes-Benz, maybe this is happening to you. But this is effectively a customer journey we saw for a single user on Mercedes. Now, I'll get into a bit more details in a second, but what's not surprising is display social search is what drove the initial website visiting, right? So you go to the website. What is surprising is maybe that you didn't realize this person saw 3,400 display ads before they actually went to the website. Over the course of their buying cycle, I should say. They went to the website 113 times organically in that cycle, right? Eventually, they bought a car. So knowing that journey kind of tells us how we would want to interact with that customer next. You probably want to, again, looking into how much of those impressions or how much of each of those channels was relevant. But again, most people wouldn't think 3,500 impressions is required. That seems like a very, very high number. But a car is a very large purchase, and your window could be quite big, right? So again, it's an interesting thing that many advertisers I don't think are looking at, especially given typical look-back window might be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, something like that. So how do we actually do this? I mean, it's exactly what I showed you on the slide before, right? So we took all of these different pieces of technology and brought them into BigQuery, which is our data warehousing platform at Google. We use GCP to basically create an enterprise data warehouse. So across many platforms, ingestion, ETL, transformation, all that kind of stuff. It basically allowed the marketing team to look at complex customer data that was aggregated across many, many systems. So again, just removing that silo aspect is a lot more powerful than I think many people are thinking about right now. And I'll get into another example of this on the Google side later on, because we actually do the same thing, and it's quite impactful. On the second piece, it's about building relationships with existing customers, right? So it's not a surprise to anybody, for example, that selling to people you've already sold to is a lot easier. And you already have a lot more data on them based on whatever your first-party systems might be. So you're looking to chase something like higher average order values, or getting customers to buy categories they never purchased before, or getting more customers into stores, existing customers into stores. One of my favorite examples of this is a company called MultiChoice. I know we have some Sky folks in the room, but I like to refer to these guys as Sky of Africa, because that's effectively what they are. They're the largest pay TV company in the continent of Africa. They've got 8.5 million customers, either in South Africa alone, I think in South Africa alone, if I remember correctly. The story here is Netflix was coming into their market, which if you're a pay TV person, it can be a scary experience, I would imagine. And they said, how can we defend our customer base against the fact that Netflix is coming in? What can we do to stay relevant? They had the typical problem that I think you would have in this business is people pay for lots of channels but only watch a few, right? And people are in households. So very few people are one person in a house watching whatever they watch. They're families, largely. So, they learned people that there's kind of two aspects here. One is the ML side, which I'll get to in a second, and the other is bringing all the data together. So on the slide, you'll see 27 different data silos, whether that's finance, registration, fleets, subscriptions, whatever it may be, all of their different data coming in. It's about 1 billion data points, which I guess depending on how you view the big data word, is big data or it's large-ish, as Sophie said. I don't know, you decide, but it's 1 billion. It's a nice number to talk about, so let's call it 1 billion data. It's only 2 terabytes, actually. So on any cloud provider, 2 terabytes costs probably about $20 a month or something like that to store. So not a huge amount of data from the cloud side in terms of storage and management, but a huge amount of data for processing, right? Most companies aren't set up to actually process 1 billion records of data. So what did they learn? Or how did they use ML? A few ways. One, Africa's, in their customer base, there are 14 different languages, right? But they had never asked their customers what language they speak. So what they do is they look at the last name of the customer, and they look at postal code or whatever the equivalent of postal code is, and they start to infer what language that person might speak. They do the same thing for gender, looking at first initial and last name and location. What might be the gender of this person? All of this is done to drive, one, what does our customer base look like? And two, what kind of offers should we make person A versus person B? The manifestation of this, or kind of how it actually ends up coming out in details for them, is they start looking at watching patterns per household and starting to build on-the-fly custom packages for each household they're going to, right? So what they don't want is Mr. MultiChoice signing up for MultiChoice in the summer season when football is on, and then unsubscribing in the winter season when it's off, because Mrs. MultiChoice is then missing out on what she wants to see. Instead, if we create a package that's a little bit higher in terms of revenue, but not so egregious they have to buy all these other things, we can keep that customer for the whole 12 months, right? And so it just kind of makes them a little bit more efficient. Then there's the Telegraph Media Group. I think everybody here would be familiar with them. Their situation's a bit different. They basically ran a pretty sweet big data warehouse, to be perfectly honest. When we walked in, we were quite impressed with what we saw. Their major concern was it was so expensive, right? So depending on how much data you're processing and where you're processing it, you might be provisioning infrastructure more so than analyzing data. And the Google way has always been take everything you do besides the analysis and push it out into the background, let somebody else handle that. Focus on what you do best, which is analyzing data. And so we worked with them to ingest all their clickstream logs, ads logs, first-party, third-party data. All of it came into BigQuery, and basically created like a very deep and joined-up view of behavioral analytics on their site, right? And that today actually powers some of the content recommendations you see on the Telegraph. So what they'll do is they'll kind of batch that analysis up, and then when you hit the site again, they'll make recommendations that are specific. I'll actually show you a little bit of BigQuery now because it's worth checking out. Can we go back to this? Thank you. So here we are. This is the BigQuery UI. It's not super exciting to anybody that's not a data person, but we love it all the same. So if you think about what I'm talking about here in terms of analyzing all this data, here you'll see on this, I'll make it a little bit bigger, that we've got one M sitting in the query. So that is our benchmark data set. So what we've done is we've crawled Wikipedia. We've taken the title of every single page and how many times it's been hit and put it into a table. In this table, we're looking at 1 million records, so 1 million different pages on Wikipedia. What we'll do is we'll run a query and say, how many times what's the hit count? That's already happened, so let me scroll down here. So you can see here we've got answers, right? So what we're saying is, show me every page where the title starts with a G, has 2 O's, and ends in a G, I believe, or maybe an E. Let's check. G-O-O-E. So it starts with a G, has 2 O's, ends in an E, right? The beauty of that is a regular expression match takes about, or can't really skip the data in any way. It has to look at every single record to make a decision on whether that title matches the schema that we're looking for, which is G-O-O-E. So over 1 million records, it only takes about 3 seconds. And 1 million records is probably the extent to which you would put into an Excel workbook, unless you were like really living on the edge. I would say that's probably where you go. If you go to 100 million, you're very quickly thinking, okay, where can my data go? And again, we're looking at about 2.7 seconds. So that's 100 million records that we're looking at every single record and making a decision, and then doing a count on how many hits hit that page, right? 100 million records today, you're probably looking into some sort of cloud database, but it comes with a lot of complication that if any of you here are provisioning infrastructure regularly, you'll know about is a super pain. But with the stuff that we're talking about in digital marketing, 100 million records is actually not that many when it comes to every single impression you've ever served, every instance in your CRM, every financial transaction you've done. Like, it kind of very, 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 very quickly ends up being in the billions. So if we do 100 billion, and let's see what happens, because sometimes this makes me look really dumb, sometimes it'll look really great. So this we're gonna see. But 100 billion, if you're our friends at Amazon, it's what your boss is worth. If you're trying to think about what that number looks like in reality, I think last time I checked, if you stacked 100 billion $1 bills up, they would go 28 times higher than the ISS, the International Space Station. So it's a huge amount of data. And it usually takes about 30 seconds. But for the major difference here is, because you're doing it so fast and so cheaply, you can kind of ask the next question relatively quickly. So what we see with customers like Spotify, when we move them to instances like this, they go very quickly from asking one question every 5 hours, waiting for their data process to play. Oh, there we go, 30 seconds. So not bad, right? Half a minute. You could do worse. They go very quickly from, we ask one question every 4 hours, or we only ask these 5 questions of our data at all times because everything else would take too long, to, well, what's the next piece of insight we want? Now that we know this, what do we want to know next? And this, for them became really critical when Taylor Swift made her Swift exit from Spotify. And they said, well, how many users do we have listening to Taylor Swift? What value of our subscribers sits in that base, right? And for them, you have 40 million subscribers, and every single song they've listened to at any given point in their entire time, you can see these records very, very rapidly become 100 billion, a trillion even. I think our largest customers run on 2 trillion records daily. So, can we go back to the slides? Sorry. I saw one screen jump and not the other. Very trippy. There we go. Okay, so intelligence at every step. So here I'm going to give you a quick example of how Google kind of puts all of this into practice for ourselves. Firstly, this is a look at the use of deep learning libraries at Google over the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, it starts in 2012, but we pretty much had nothing in 2012. We were a big, dumb company back then. Now, it ends in 2016. So if you look into the 2018, I would suspect that that graph goes quite high. There are over 3,000 or 4,000 product libraries that are using deep learning in some way at Google. You'll see that in things like Smart Reply in your Gmail, to maps telling you when to leave for a place, to, just about any other product we have has machine learning in it. I think one thing I would ask you to think about is, what does that graph look like for where you are, right? So does your company have a similar graph? And if so, that's amazing. And if not, why not? And where can that actually change? So where we actually use this stuff. Most of you would be familiar with G Suite, or at least have personal Gmail accounts in some way. That's fairly common. So G Suite is our office productivity suite. It's what we take to market as docs, slides, sheets, all that kind of stuff. We ran actually internally into this issue a couple of years ago where we said, we don't know which campaigns drive the most paid users in our own business. So we don't know how to invest our own marketing dollars, which is a pretty shameful thing to admit, being us, but there you go. And the reason is, in our old model, this is what customer acquisition looked like. So on the left side, you see channels, right? It's paid search, social media, and display, right? So very standard channels that all of you are familiar with. We would buy media there to generate free trial users on G Suite. Now, G Suite has a 30-day free trial. So we couldn't actually see how many of the users that we generated via these channels were going to become paid users, right? So we have a 30-day lag before we get any feedback on our marketing. Then we know who's converted, and then we re-optimize the channel spend from where we generated those trial users. Does that make sense to everybody? Right, okay, perfect. So 45 days, not great, really, really slow iteration and testing cycles, right? So what we did instead is we put machine learning at the front of it, which sounds a lot simpler when I say it that way, but it's actually not that simple. But here's how that works. We buy media across the channels, and we see the users that come in. When the users come in, we compare those using a predictive model to every user that's converted in the past on G Suite, right? Be it usage patterns, usage in the trial products, because we can kind of track all of that stuff and say, okay, these people that are using G Suite look very similar to everyone that's bought G Suite in the last 6 months. Ergo, these are our high-value contacts. These are the ones we score high. If we score these high, where did they come from? And then we go back and remanage or rechange that investment, right? So we've tightened that loop from 45 days to 48 hours, which is a pretty significant shrink. We'd love to get it tighter, but I think we're pretty happy with where it is right now. But think about, again, like, is there a place you could do this kind of thing on your side? The key there is we're going away from the 2 boxes on the left and more towards the 2 boxes on the right? So I spend a lot of time with customers who come to me saying they want to talk about machine learning, and instead they're talking about descriptive and diagnostic problems. So those are reporting issues. Which store of mine had the most sales last year? That's not machine learning so much as it is your data is not in the right order for you to figure this thing out. What you want to know is, based on what we see out in the market, which store of mine is going to be the highest selling this year? Right? And then how can I invest in more staff for those people, or more inventory, or whatever it may be, right? So those are the 2 kind of major differences. This is a case of us getting out of the descriptive diagnostic, where we're waiting 45 days, then running reporting, then making changes, to the kind of predictive prescriptive, which is every 2 days we get a score back and say, okay, well, how do we change where we're buying? The key parts for us on this are kind of these 3 functions on the team, so I would encourage you to think about how you guys stack up on this front. Engineering for us is about things like data ingestion, so connecting to the data sources, bringing them into a warehouse. Data science, as Sophie was talking about, is much more about analysis, so whether it's SQL, Python, R, whatever it might be, actually looking at the data once it's in a place, playing with it and seeing the trends and patterns, and then deciding how we're going to activate on those. And then marketing is the people that actually takes that data and goes buys media against it and makes decisions, right? So you kind of need that setup. So depending on where you're at currently in terms of team structure, you might want to think about that a little bit more. So like I said, those are the 3 things I wanted to talk about: channel first to customer first. So going from looking at where we buy media to who we buy, and then changing where we buy based on who we want to buy. Building relationships with existing customers, so understanding our customer base really, really well and targeting offers to them specifically. And then last is kind of embedding ML throughout the whole thing, which is, well, you saw that, G Suite as fast as you can. But yeah, how to activate against the data that you have to get a better result on your marketing spend. Cool, that's me.
Cool. Thanks for that, Rahul. So again, we're doing well for time. So another opportunity to ask any questions. I've got one myself if nobody has this time, but if somebody else wants to stick their hands
Moderator
up and
question.
Overrule me. Question over here. If we've got a mic coming down. Sorry,
I'm also really hard of hearing, so the mic is useful.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just a quick question about the Mercedes example that you ran through. So was the conversion decided when they configured a car online, or was it done in store?
Yeah, understood. I skipped that part. So I don't know why I skipped it, but let me tell you about it now. So the key thing that we drove for Mercedes was, one, understanding what parts of their site were high value, right? So kind of taking analytics from their GA360 setup and making it a little bit more beefy. But 2, the end result was we realized that actually speeding up the price estimator or payment estimator part of the application would drive way more leads. And so looking at the analytics pattern, we figured that out. We sped that up 50%, or no, we sped that up some amount, and we actually drove 50% more leads to Mercedes-Benz. So the conversion would be ran a price estimator and asked for it to be emailed to themselves or whatever that process is.
Okay, right. So they're not necessarily tying in the offline process of going into.
No, the conversion was not bought a car. No.
Perfect.
Which would be awesome, but yeah, no, we didn't do it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Any more questions? Anybody else? Can't see any hands, but I'm going to ask my one.
Oh, God.
I guess machine learning, it's not a new concept, but it's become a hot topic in the last 12 to 18 months. It's to some it may seem scary and kind of difficult to get your head around what it is and what it can do for business. We've got some great examples of some of perhaps the bigger sort of projects that you guys have been worked on. For some of the people who are in the audience today, thinking about how machine learning can make a difference for their business, what would be a sensible first step to take in terms of how you can make this work for your business?
I mean, the first thing you have to do, and like, it's almost everybody that comes to us to talk about ML, we end up sending them back 3 steps is, well, where's your data?
Yeah.
And they go, right? So it all kind of, it needs to be in the same place. So often it's a political thing in a business. Sometimes it's compliance. But if your data is not in the same place, we don't have the number of records we need to actually do anything super sexy or spectacular with it. So that's the first thing. And then getting your data in the same place kind of begs the second piece, which is, okay, now that you have it all together, who's going to work on it, right? And again, like doing the first one kind of forces the second question, which is we invested all this time putting 100 billion records into a single data platform, and we don't have 5 analysts to work on this thing. So then we move to the next phase. So getting your data together first is number one. I would actually say thinking about what the use cases are is less relevant because the shape of the data will kind of determine what we can and cannot predict. So that part you can kind of push out. But getting all your data to one spot, no matter what you're trying to do, I think is one of the most important things that many people aren't treating with as much gravity, I think, as you should.
Yeah, which kind of, I guess, reflects the point we talked about.
Oh, yeah.
Unless you've got your data, get that sorted first before you even think about moving on to the next
You really
step.
cannot do anything without it. So
Yeah.
often we sit there and twiddle our thumbs and say, guys, you need to fix this problem first, otherwise we're SOL, as they say in the business.
Yeah, no problem. Got time for one more if anybody else has got a burning question that they'd like to ask. No more? Okay, well, we'll move on to the next one. Thank you very much, Rahul. Another round of applause there.